Welcome, everybody. Happy Friday. And it's an amazing day because we're ending it with Anne Byrne for tabletop role-playing games and executive functioning, planning for adventure. And you guys are going to have the chance to earn 2.5 CEUs today. And the way you'll earn those CEUs is by staying the entire webinar. Yes, the entire. You can't miss any time at all. Otherwise, you will not. You don't want.
Fun stuff, guys.
But also, you'll have to participate in poll questions that are going to be popping up.
Oh, Marissa? Okay, let's see.
GoToWebinar is not going.
Oh, the audio cut out for me for a little bit. So could you repeat the part about the audio cut out for me for a little bit? Okay, so I'm having a little bit of difficulty with my audio. I might have to call in, which would be okay. Is anyone else having difficulty with the audio, or is it just me? Okay, you can hear me okay. All right. Marissa, I think I know the BDS spiel. So everyone, welcome. So BDS is an amazing company. You probably know of them well. And I've done a few webinars with them. So I'm hopeful that I can go through the spiel. You must attend, in order to get your CEUs, you must attend for the entire webinar. It will also be recorded, and you have to answer the poll questions. So there are poll questions that will come up. There's not a right answer, it's a poll. So what we need is your participation in that poll question. GoToWebinar is tracking your engagement. So, make sure that you answer the poll question when it comes up. I am your, and CEUs will be available for purchase for 30 days. Have I got everything right, Marissa? Okay, hopefully we can get Marissa back on the call. All right, and just another confirmation, please, give me a raised hand. There is a reaction. You can give me a raised hand if you can hear me.
Hello. I'm so sorry about that. Can you hear me? I don't know what just happened. My internet just booted me and it wouldn't connect to any other internet source that I had. I am so sorry, everybody.
No worries. I told everyone about the polls. And will they be able to watch the recording if they have to skip out early and submit the poll question answers there?
Yes. So you're not going to be able to earn CEUs from watching the recording, everybody. That's not a possibility. Please make sure that if you need CEUs, you do attend live right now. You stay with me and you're staying the entire time of the webinar. You can't even get booted out for a couple of seconds like I did, because that may jeopardize your qualification for CEUs. But all right, I'm going to put something in the chat box in a couple of minutes that's going to reiterate a little bit of what I'm saying now. So if you end up missing anything, it's okay. But if you, I'm just kind of going to take it a little bit from the top. So this way I don't kind of forget anything since it's kind of a little system that I have here. But all right, everybody. Oh, no problem, Katie. Yeah, if you can't get CEUs, you will be able to watch that recording. It's going to be posted on Monday. We process the recordings 1 business day after the webinar, so that's when you'll be able to watch it, just like that's when you'll get your CE certificate instructions. But I'll go more into how you'll get those CEUs and qualify for those certificates and all that kind of good stuff when the first poll comes up. So I hope that you've joined with that join webinar button that was emailed to you. If you are dialed in audio only, GoToWebinar is not able to record your attendance. So please make sure that if you have any audio issues whatsoever and you do need to dial in, that you do still stay logged in with that join webinar button that was emailed to you. This way you can try to get the best of both worlds the most you can. Alrighty, I think that's kind of all I got to say for now.
Definitely think Marissa and I are really excited about this closed captioning, which is really great. I'm always happy to see things become more accessible. But closed captioning gives its best guess. So I am really persnickety about keeping an eye on the question box and making sure that I'm answering those questions as we go, especially for a webinar like this, where I want it to be a little bit more interactive. So if there's anything on the closed captioning that looks weird or doesn't make contextual sense, please ask and I will reply in the questions box what I was actually saying. So just, if you're relying on the closed caption, please feel free to ask for corrections, because automatic closed captions, they can be a little funky. So, and I'm happy to make this more accessible to you in any way that I can.
Yes, thank you, Anne, for adding that. Also, if we had to turn it on individually, I had to turn it on and Anne had to turn it on herself. So it didn't automatically just turn it on for everybody. So you may need to turn it on for yourself within the GoToWebinar layout. I'm not sure exactly where it is on your phone, as this is a new feature and we haven't tested it out completely yet. But within the GoToWebinar feature, I see it as a caption box, a CC button on the bottom of my screen there if you're on the computer. But I think that's all I got to say for now. So I'll pop in again when the first poll comes up.
We also had a question about the PowerPoint being available. I do have a bunch of goodies that are available that I, for some reason, did not include the PowerPoint. So I can absolutely send that we can pass that PowerPoint along with no problem. All right, is everyone ready for the adventure that awaits us? Okay, let's see. I'm getting a lot of thumbs up. Ready, people. So let's just start our slideshow. Okay, tabletop role-playing games. An executive functioning, planning for adventure. So my name is Anne Byrne. I am a BCBA. I've been a BCBA for a little over 15 years. And I have done a lot in the field. I've worked in all kinds of settings. I've worked across the lifespan. I'm very interested in ethics. So you might know me from some of our ethics webinars that I've done at BDS, or from the textbook, which I co-authored with Jacob Sadavoy on practical applications of ethics. Or from my work with the Global Autism Project. So I've been around a long time, and tabletop role-playing games are something that I became interested in during the pandemic. We were, like a lot of parents, I was looking for something for my kids to do that would not be television. And although we did a lot of television, if I'm honest, we went through the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. So I was looking for something for my kids to do that would encourage their social interaction, that would kind of be something to do. And a friend of mine from my church said, I do tabletop role-playing games. And I was like, sure, great, sounds wonderful. And as I became more involved in this and started playing with friends, started playing with family, I realized what a wonderful tool this was, and what a wonderful tool collaborative storytelling is for teaching executive functioning in a way that is really client-focused and strengths-based. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about now. Now, I usually go into my experience as a BCBA, but I am also a 7th level wizard. I am a 3rd level warlock and a 2nd level cleric. So, which will all make sense to you in a little bit. And these role-playing games really are such a wonderful tool for socialization, and for teaching. Yeah, 12th level paladin and a 7th level bard. Oh my goodness. Okay, so we've got some people with some experience with tabletop role-playing games, and I hope we have some people with no experience with tabletop role-playing games as well. All right, so greetings, adventurers. Welcome to a rather unusual CEU about some rather unusual programming to address what is actually a very usual problem. Executive functioning and emotional rigidity, specifically in autism spectrum disorder, but a lot of the things that we're going to talk about apply also to kids with ADHD, or to kids who just have a little difficulty with accepting. We've got a lot of experienced players. Holy smoke. Okay. So these issues with executive functioning can apply equally to a lot of different diagnoses. I know many of us work with kids with autism spectrum disorder, so that's what I'm really going to be talking about mostly today. So we're going to start right off with a poll. So if you would launch that poll, Marissa.
Alrighty, everybody. Black box should have popped up on your screen, and you should be able to select an answer and lock it in with that submit button. I did just throw some important information into the chat, so please make sure you review that before putting any administration, bookkeeping kind of questions into the questions box, please. I understand there will be a lot of interaction today. So if you have trouble with these polls, well, first off, please make sure you are participating in these polls if you need CEUs. These are a requirement in order for you to qualify. If you only need a general certificate of attendance, you don't necessarily need to participate in these polls. However, this is an Ann Fern webinar, and they're always going to be fun, so please do. Also, if you have trouble actually using the box to submit your answers, you can write your answers in the body of an email and send them to me after the webinar. That is perfectly okay. Just make sure that you are participating in them if you need those CEUs somehow. It's okay to miss one poll question. Please do not send me a single response. If everybody sent me every time they missed one poll question, my inbox would be crazy. So please don't do that. It's okay to miss just one. But send me all of your responses at the end, and that's perfectly okay. You'll get a general certificate of attendance just about an hour after we end here, and that's completely free of charge. But as I said, that's a general certificate of attendance, so it will not have your BACB information or ACE provider information, anything like that. CEUs, your certificates will be coming on Monday, and I will also be posting the recording to bds.com/recordings on Monday as well. So if you need to watch the recording, it'll be available there. All right, let's shut this down. It looks like, where do you work? 21% are in a clinic, 17% are in homes, 28% are in schools, and 34% do a little bit of everything.
Okay, so we've got like an interesting mix, and so this is going to hopefully, tell you a little bit more about how you can start incorporating these games into your settings wherever you are. All right, so let's talk about our objectives. This is our quest today. So today we will identify areas of executive functioning and deficits in these areas common in individuals with autism or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. As far as emotional rigidity and executive functioning, there's a huge amount of overlap in how these deficits present for individuals with autism spectrum disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So we are going to be talking about how that impacts social skills. We'll also identify ethical and practical issues with traditional methods of teaching flexibility. When I first started my career, I taught flexibility very differently from the way I teach it now, and very differently from the opportunity that tabletop role-playing games allows us. We're going to talk about emotional flexibility in behavioral terms. We're going to nail down some actual definitions. And we're going to describe specific skills addressed in programming using tabletop role-playing games. We'll describe some considerations in implementing tabletop role-playing games. Tabletop role-playing games are having a moment. They are becoming super trendy, and it's the age of the nerd. And but there are some issues with implementing and making sure that this is something that feels safe and is enjoyable for all of our clients. We'll also identify specific tabletop role-playing games resources for different age groups, including some common game systems and modifications for programming. So let's start off by asking ourselves, our kind of check is a little wink wink for those of you who've done tabletop role-playing games before. First, we're going to look at what we know. What is the lore of neurology, right? And we're going to talk about what is executive functioning. We do have a question about behavioral flexibility. Is this the same thing as psychological flexibility in ACT? I'm less familiar with the specifics of ACT. I know kind of like a smattering about it, but it is along the same lines. We're going to come up with some specific operational definitions that are observable and measurable. Because ACT is more of a self-management, there are behaviors under the skin that ACT addresses that are not super responsible for us as clinicians to identify as behavioral goals. So ACT is a program that uses radical behaviorism to think about our thinking patterns, which of course thinking is a behavior, whereas this is a little bit more about methodological behaviorism and observable behaviors. Does that make sense, Darren? So it's similar, but I don't think it quite checks all the boxes of psychological flexibility, but similar and definitely related. So executive functioning. So what is executive functioning? And Darren, if that doesn't answer your question, feel free to ask again. Okay, so are we talking more about emotional intelligence? We're talking a little bit more about behavior and social interaction, and emotional intelligence is more of a characteristic. And so we're talking about the behaviors that indicate that. I also tend to think about emotional intelligence as something that's really static, whereas behavior can be changed. Okay, thanks. Great. All right. So when we're talking about executive functioning, we're talking about neurological processes that allow us to engage in goal-directed behavior. So when I've looked at executive functioning, I've really had a lot of difficulty sort of finding a really good definition. But so we might think about these as those processes that allow goal-directed behavior, including planning, which is in part working memory, goal setting, flexibility. So if you can't do one thing, you can do a different thing, problem solving, and self-management. So all of these are things that allow us to engage in goal-directed behavior. And especially as our clients get older, they may have a tremendous amount of academic skills, but these are the skills that really make a difference in the long term. These are the skills that allow you to apply for a job, allow you to succeed in college, allow you to manage your schedule. So deficits in these skills can really impact inclusion. So I have heard so many times, as you know, I'm also, in addition to being a BCBA with oh boy, like 25, 30 years experience working with individuals with autism. I also have a son with ADHD. And the number of times I've heard people say, he's so bright, he should be able to do this. And then I've had to say, okay, I'm pretty bright. I should be able to see the TV from the couch, but I can't. I have to do this. So I need an accommodation in order to make that happen. So these deficits in executive functioning, even if we have really high academic skills, can really impact our clients. All right, so let's think about what executive functioning deficits look like. So an executive functioning deficit might look like difficulty with flexibility, difficulty if plans change, or we were going to go to the beach today, but it's raining, so we can't go to the beach. There might be a really, what we might consider a disproportionate response to that. Or we're not going to pizza tonight, we're going to pizza tomorrow. Like these types of changes in plans might really have an emotional impact on our clients. It might also look like difficulty with organizing materials or their time. And this could also be a really significant impact. So here again, we see where even if a client has academic skills, they might not have the same academic performance because of that kind of difficulty. It also might look like difficulty attending. Executive functioning requires that we are attending to all of the variables that might impact how we plan and how we engage in goal-directed behavior. And it might also look like non-functional adherence to routines. So, what does that sound like? For many of us who work with individuals with autism, that sounds awfully familiar, right? So the DSM-5, these behaviors are very socially isolating and we don't talk about them enough. Yes, exactly. And, or we talk about them in some not very helpful ways, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. So this sounds really familiar to those of us who work with individuals with autism, right? The DSM-5 states that restrictive, repetitive patterns of behavior are part of the autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. So, and this is manifested by at least two of the following: stereotyped or repetitive motor movements, use of objects or speech, which might be like that sort of structured play that we might see, like lining up toys or using objects in ways that we might consider unusual. There also might be an insistence on sameness or inflexible adherence to routines or ritualized patterns of verbal or nonverbal behavior. Extreme distress at small changes, difficulties with transition or rigid thinking patterns. And these are all reflections of that emotional rigidity that's part of executive functioning. So we tend to, Darren, I agree that these behaviors are very socially isolating. We don't talk about them enough. But I might also add to that when we do talk about them, we often talk about them a little bit later in the game. You can work on aspects of executive functioning at a very young age. So these types of distress at small changes and rigid thinking patterns and adherence to non-functional routines have a strong social impact. And so we can start talking about them and addressing them when our clients are at an age where their same age peers need them to, and where they need others to as well. So that, for example, if you have a client who always plays with a red car and always plays moving it down the garage in a particular way and in a certain pattern of behavior, if they're in a classroom with the same age peer and the peer wants to take their blue car and move it in a different way around the garage, It's very important that our clients be able to tolerate that and be able to play with peers, not in a way that restricts our clients' behavior, but allows them to accept other people's behavior. It's a subtle difference, but it's an important difference. So here's where it gets a little messy. Okay, so we have a question from Nicholas. Age, though, especially for younger kids, may not be representative due to rounding deadlines. That is true. In December, a 10-year-old born in January might be totally different from one born in October. That is an excellent point. So we also want to think about not so much the age as like, this is your birthday, but the response to the community. Behavior is context dependent. So we want to make sure that in the context when these behaviors are going to be needed, that's what we're thinking about. So for those of us who work through insurance, working on executive functioning can be a little bit complicated. Because insurance companies may not recognize executive functioning as something that impacts autism spectrum disorder, although we just discussed it does, right? So one thing that I found helpful in designing treatment plans is to mention specifically the core characteristics listed in the DSM-5. So if I notice emotional rigidity, I might say this emotional rigidity is consistent with core characteristics of autism spectrum disorder, which lets the insurance company know I am addressing the autism spectrum disorder by doing this, or this adherence to non-functional routines is typical of autism spectrum disorder. I'm telling the insurance company this is part of what we're addressing with this treatment plan. So let's do another Arcana check. Let's think about what the information is out there. What is flexibility? What does it look like behaviorally? So flexibility is often described as going with the flow, which is kind of similar to a description of swimming when you think about it. So as terms of what it looks like behaviorally, we don't have a whole lot of good examples. So I asked an expert. I'm going to address your question in a moment, Colleen. So my son actually, who has ADHD, attended a behavioral summer intervention program, which was amazing. And one day he said, I am going to get the most flexible award. He was just like determined. He woke up that morning just determined, and he did it. So I asked him, what are the things that you do to get that award? And so we came up with, he and I together came up with some pretty good definitions, I think. So accepting other people's ideas. Again, it's not about changing your own ideas so much as letting other people have their ideas. Changing plans. So, you know what? They're out of, they're out of that kind of Skittles. We're going to have to get that kind of Skittles. Or it rains today. We can't go to the beach. Being able to change plans. Waiting. This is a very common program that we run, right? And solving problems. These are all areas of flexibility. These are all areas of flexibility that are really important to work on for even for younger children. So we have a question from Colleen. How would you state that for students with ODD or EBD diagnosis that also lag in executive functioning skills? So as long as you're calling back to the specific language in the DSM-5, it is something that it's easy to advocate for with an insurance company. So if you're calling back to that language specifically, if your treatment plan is intended to, from the insurance company's perspective, is intended to address ODD, then call back to the language of the DSM-5. Especially, I would imagine accepting others' ideas, or you can talk about the impact of that socially. how that impacts their performance in the classroom, or how that impacts them socially, would be where I would, depending on the funding source. If you're in school, talk about how that impacts them in the classroom, and how that impacts them academically. So whenever you're advocating, the sort of unwritten question that we're answering when we're advocating is, why should I pay for this? Right? So the insurance company is saying, why should we pay for this? The insurance company is, or the school system is saying, why should the taxpayers pay for this? So what we're doing when we advocate is we're saying, okay, here's how this impacts. Here's how this fits in with the kind of things we want to provide. So if you provide if you pull from the phrasing of the DSM-5, that's helpful. If you talk about the impact, the educational impact, that's helpful as well. All right, Darren, I didn't forget about you. I have slides coming up. All right. So as a little side quest, I just want to talk a little bit about behavioral interventions for kids with ADHD and kids with autism, and how they're perceived very differently. So let's do a little perception check. Here's the scenario. You have an 8-year-old child who talks about superheroes constantly. What does their teacher or clinician say? If they're diagnosed with ADHD, let's start with ASD. When they're diagnosed with ASD, they might say, this is a restricted interest, no more superheroes. You can't talk about superheroes anymore because that is a restricted interest. I'm cutting it off. If they're diagnosed with ADHD, they might say, okay, this is an area of hyperfocus. Let's talk about superheroes some of the time, but we'll make sure that they can focus when they need to on other things. We're gonna limit it. If that child has a diagnosis of giftedness, you would say, wow, they're so passionate about superheroes. They have so much knowledge about superheroes. They're so smart. Nisha, you missed one poll question. So would you send that in the chat, Marissa? Okay, thanks. So it's the same behavior is what I want to point out here. So we do want to make sure that we are addressing behaviors and their actual impact. So while with the insurance company, we want to be clear about like, yes, this isn't just me hanging out and playing with dice. I'm working for a living here. We do want to be clear internally that we're addressing the needs of our client based on their impact to the client. All right, so let's think about rigidity. And I think that it was Darren, it was a few of you actually talked about rigidity. And let's look for when that's in the case and treat it in those situations. So when we're thinking about rigidity or about restricted interests, we want to think about how much they actually impact the quality of life for our clients, right? So there has been a lot of talk within the neurodiversity movement about autism as a disability. So I would put to you this. I would say, given the world, I go by the World Health Organization definition of disability, which means that there is something that impacts someone's full participation. What that means is that a disability must be disabling. So autism or ADHD is a disability to the extent that it disables, that it interferes with the job of being a kid. I'm going to say being a kid because many of us work with kids. So what is the job of being a kid? The job of being a kid is growing, learning, playing, and making friends. So when we think about restricted interests, when we think about rigidity, we want to think about it in those terms. Does this rigidity, does this restricted interest interfere with growing, learning, playing, or making friends? And if it does, we should intervene. And if it doesn't, we should shift our focus and, perhaps find a way to access other communities. Okay. I don't think you missed too much time for the certificate, Nisha, but I think the most interesting stuff is coming, so I'm biased. So, okay. Now, before I play this, I just want to explain, for those of you who don't know who Will Wheaton is. Will Wheaton played Wesley Crusher on Star Trek Next Generation, and he's a pretty well-known, he's like probably the most well-known nerd around. And he was asked at a comic book convention to give someone's baby daughter his thoughts on why it's awesome to be a nerd. And as we think about restricted interest, I would love to, did a poll get sent? Not yet. We're going to send another poll in a minute. All right, here we go.
Are you going?
I'm going.
Hi, Violet. My name is Will Wheaton. It's 2013, and you've just recently joined us on planet Earth. So welcome. I'm an actor, and I'm a writer, and I'm a dad. And your mother asked me to tell you why it's awesome to be a nerd. And that's an easy thing for me to do because that's who I am. I don't know what the world's going to be like by the time you understand this. I don't know what it's going to mean to be a nerd when you are a young woman. For me, when I was growing up, being a nerd meant that I liked things that were a little weird, that took a lot of effort to appreciate and understand. It meant that I loved science, and I loved playing board games, reading books, and really understanding what went on in the world instead of just kind of riding the planet through space. And when I was a little boy, people really teased us about that and made us feel like there was something wrong with us for loving those things. Now that I'm an adult, I'm kind of a professional nerd, and the world has changed a lot. And I think a lot of us have realized that being a nerd or being a geek is another word you'll hear, and I sort of use the terms interchangeably. It's not about what you love. It's about how you love it. So there's going to be a thing in your life that you love, and I don't know what it's going to be. It might be sports, it might be science, it might be reading, it might be fashion design, it might be building things, it might be telling stories or taking pictures. It doesn't matter what it is. The way you love that, and the way that you find other people who love it the way you do, is what makes being a nerd awesome. The defining characteristic of us, the people in this room, and I'm going to ask your mom to turn this camera around in a minute. Go there, go on. The defining characteristic that ties us all together is that we love things. And some of us love Firefly, and some of us love Game of Thrones, and some of us love, these are things that you'll be able to go see there in your history book. Some of us love Star Trek, or Star Wars, or anime, or games, or fantasy, or science fiction. Some of us love completely different things, but we all love those things so much that we travel for thousands of miles, which is probably easy for you, but it's still, we're still on fossil fuels. I don't know what you're doing. And it's difficult. We come from all over, in some cases all over the world, so that we can be around people who love the things that we love the way that we love them. And that's why being a nerd is awesome. And don't ever let anybody tell you that that thing that you love is a thing that you can't love. Don't ever let anyone tell you, you can't love that, that's for boys. You have to love this because you're a girl. You find the things that you love, and you love them the most that you can. And listen, this is really important. I want you to be honest, honorable, kind. I want you to work hard, because everything worth doing is hard. And I want you to be awesome. And I'm going to do my very best to leave you a planet that you can still live on.
So I love that, and I think it really is a great way to think about, when, a lot of times I will talk to parents who will say, like, oh, my child has this interest in this thing, he's this very passionate interest, and is that part of autism spectrum disorder, or is that, and I'll say, maybe, but really the most important thing is that we really allow our clients to love what they love in the way that they love it, and find people who feel the same. It is a privilege as a neurotypical person that, like, nobody, I'm wearing a D20 t-shirt today. Like, nobody's going to bother me. I'm wearing unicorn earrings. Like, who's going to bother me about that? That is, is that age appropriate? Who cares? So we need to embrace the same sort of idea for our clients. And it's not only about encouraging them to love the things that they love in the way that they love them, but encouraging them to find others who do the same. So we can help our client to find what they love and other people who love it the way they do. We've taken something that's restrictive and we've opened it up into the world so it doesn't restrict anymore. Restrictive interests are restrictive to the extent that they actually restrict something. So, why role-playing games? Why is this my obsession, my passion project? One thing that's great about role-playing games is that they are novel by nature. So if you have one person who has played this particular role-playing game using this particular adventure, they have had a completely different experience from anyone else who's done that. And they include an element of randomization, which is in dice. So it is time for a poll. This is poll number 2, by the way. There was a little bit of concern of like, oh man, you've been talking for a while, we haven't had a poll. So this is poll number 2.
Yeah, I think as soon as everybody hears the word poll question, they're like, oh my God, did I miss one? Am I supposed to see one?
Well, I think also I've got all my 17th level paladin, like knocking that poll answer. So I think I've got a few people who are like so excited about Dungeons and Dragons. They like popped into that poll.
But don't worry, everybody. This is only number 2, so you haven't missed anything. But if you got that first one, you're in great shape. If you have missed any time, please just keep in mind that if you need CEUs, that they're also time-based, so you may not qualify depending on the amount of time that you've missed if you've been kicked out like I was earlier. Yes, Ashley, that's exactly where you put your questions. That's the quote chat, even though there's another actual chat. Alrighty, thanks for voting, everybody. Let's shut this down.
Questions do go. I keep an eye on the question box, Ashley, and I love to read comments. So comments and questions, yes, this is exactly where they go. And I do keep an eye out because I'm always nervous that I'm gonna miss somebody saying, "Can you repeat that?" And I'm like, I don't know. So Katie, if you cannot see the poll, you might be using your phone. You can send in, the poll is, are you familiar with tabletop role-playing games? And the answers are, yes, I play all the time. I've heard of them and seen some played, or what?
Yes, if you've missed the poll for whatever reason, please check the chat box before submitting any admin questions. I did put a lot of important information there for troubleshooting, if you're logged in improperly, if polls aren't working, and etc. So please read that and follow those instructions. They're very important. We're trying to stay away from, not stay away, but trying to limit a little bit some of the feedback that comes into the questions box. We get a lot of the same questions, so we're trying something new with putting it in the chat box. And if that does end up working, then please give me that feedback as well. But alrighty, let's
let's do the same. Do polls on the phone app, click more, click poll, and then answer. Thank you, Elizabeth.
You're awesome, Elizabeth. Alrighty, so here are the results. It looks like 34% say yes all the time, 42% say that they've heard of them and seen some played, and 25% say what?
It's okay. So yeah, it's since the 80s, Ashley, like Dungeons and Dragons in particular, I think it's because of Stranger Things and then followed by the pandemic, has really been having a moment. So we're going to talk about that one, but also some others. So what's wrong with the way I've always taught flexibility? Everything broke? Well, nothing's necessarily wrong with that, but using tabletop role-playing games does open up a few, Jesse, I'm going to get to that question. I'm going to get to your question about when we talk about consent, okay, which is we're going to talk about. So nothing's necessarily wrong with the way that we've taught flexibility, but this opens up a lot more possibilities. And I do want us to think about how we have taught flexibility in the past. So here's how I used to teach flexibility. And I think that the question I need to ask myself is this flexibility or is this a power struggle? Am I teaching flexibility or am I teaching compliance? So the way I used to teach it was, okay, you need to try a new way. You always take the red car and move it down the garage in exactly this way. You need to try something new. And the client would want to try it their own way. I was once teaching, I'm laughing because this client was so adorable. I was working on accepting others' ideas in play. So the BT, very non-threatening, exactly the way that I would recommend teaching it. He drove the car his way. And she said, oh, my idea is I'm going to drive the car like this. And the kid said, that's a wrong idea. And we had to say, like, okay, you can have your idea and I can have my idea. But that really was the mindset. He was like, I want to do it my way. So had we tried to force this client to do it the way we wanted to do it, that wouldn't have felt right. That would have been intruding on his play and building compliance rather than building flexibility. So I might say, like, you need to try a new food. You can't have chicken nuggets every night. Try something else. Or you need to accept your friend's idea. Or I'm going to choose. Now, from the client's perspective, if you find yourself with your client saying, like, I need to win the game, or I had a client say to me once, you're being really rigid right now. And I was like, oh, okay, fair, actually. I sort of was being rigid, if I'm being honest, because if I'm going to set up a program that is like, I get to choose if we're using Peppa Pig to play baseball or soccer, like, is this the hill I want to die on, whether Peppa Pig plays baseball or soccer? So, and so he was saying you're being really rigid, which means he understands academically some of the expectations of flexibility, but how it plays out is more challenging for him. And why? Because I haven't taught how to navigate that. Flexibility doesn't mean being a doormat. Flexibility means being able to make adjustments. So I'm gonna go back. I got so passionate, I lost my, okay, so quick poll. How do your clients find friends? So one of the really difficult things about working with kids with autism spectrum disorder, especially for those of us who work in homes or work in clinics, is finding friends. And I've seen a lot of programs about making friends and figuring out who would be a good friend. But this is an enormous challenge, right?
Amazing. Thank you all for voting. I'll leave
Yeah, there was someone mentioned like casting divine smite on the poll questions, like, like and everyone's answering really quick. And I think that's because this is an area where a lot of us struggle. A lot of us get stuck trying to figure out how our clients can find friends.
Alrighty. Looks like 24% say school, 13% say family friends, and 63% say it's a struggle.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for your honesty, because it really is. So role-playing games, one of the things I love about role-playing games is they provide a context for making friends. So that's really helpful as we work with clients with autism spectrum disorder. We're providing a skill that translates to a friend-making context. So let's talk a little bit about what are role-playing games. In a role-playing game, the players assume the role of a character in a fictional setting, and they act out that character. This could mean speaking as the character. It could mean making decisions as the character, but not speaking as the character. But you play the game from the perspective of that character. So it is creating a story as a character in the story. So another thing is that there's a structured decision-making process. So success of an effort depends on successful dice rolls. And what's really great, so you can have successful dice rolls or unsuccessful dice rolls. You have many of them over the course of a game. So that there are many opportunities to work on flexibility. And then based on that dice roll, you move the story forward in one direction or another. One of the greatest things about tabletop role-playing games, is they are cooperative rather than competitive. The players work as a team to solve problems and to accomplish goals. The most famous tabletop role-playing game is Dungeons & Dragons. So one way to think about tabletop role-playing games is as a system of rules for collaborative storytelling. So it's storytelling, but it's not that everything you say just instantly happens. There's a set of rules for how to make things happen. So within tabletop role-playing games, we have the game master. Someone said they were a forever DM. They are in the position of narrating the sort of background of the story. So within each decision, the game master would describe the current situation. The players would then ask questions, and then the players would decide what they want to do, and then describe that effort. In some cases, the game master may also require the player to roll dice in order to determine whether or not their determine whether or not their effort is successful. We have a question, it's kind of a rule mechanics question, Tanner, which would depend on the game system that you are using. But there might be some situations where a game master would decide that you would roll dice, and some situations where you would not. And so I'm going to take your question is, could the quality of the player response determine the modifier provided on their roll? You might say, let's say you have two characters, and one of them plays a character who's very short, and the other one plays a character who's very tall. And you've been working on some good sportsmanship skill. The client who's playing the character that's very tall, you've been working on sportsmanship skills. You've been working on socialization. And they say, and they turn to the character who's very short, and they say, well, we want to get over this wall. Can I throw you? And then that player says, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. If you want to encourage that socialization, you might say, go ahead, you're successful. I'm not going to make you roll dice. So, the game master has whatever flexibility is needed. So let's think about it this way. I want you all to, I'm not going to ask anyone to participate out loud this time. I want you to look at this picture and take a look at, all of these characters. And I want you to pick one that really resonates with you. I've heard this described as you should be thinking, you should be more attached to this than you are to, say, the thimble in Monopoly. Like, this should be someone you're like, oh, yeah, I would love to pretend to be that guy. Okay, so pick one that you really like and keep that picture in your mind. All right, so you've been walking for hours. You've been on this quest. You've been walking through the woods, and suddenly you encounter this bridge. On the other side of the bridge, you hear a faint sound of music, almost as if something is calling you. Something or someone is calling you. And you see a slight glimmer of light. What do? Now I want you can put it in the question box, or you can just think about what you're going to do. All right, so, okay, Nicholas, I know that you're familiar, so I'm going to you roll insight immediately. Okay, so Nicholas wants to try and figure out what it is at the other side of the bridge. Is there any other, this is my fancy dice. So anyone else, run across the bridge. So we have one person who's going to run across the bridge, cross the bridge. Okay, send Nicholas ahead and I'll wait. That was funny. Okay, send my owl ahead. Nicholas, you're so eager that a lot of people want to. Okay, so we have some check for traps. Okay, so I'm going to take Faith. Suggest I'm going to check for traps. You're all thinking it sounds a little too easy. Okay, so this is going to be what we call a difficulty class of 15. If I roll a 15 or higher, you will find what you are looking for. 9. Look safe. So you cross the bridge. So rolling the dice is the best part here, right? Rolling the dice allows an element of chance that encourages flexibility without it being a power struggle. It's not me that decided that you couldn't see the trap on the other side. It's the dice that decided that. Not only that, you're going to roll dice again in a few minutes. So this momentary unfavorable conclusion is part of what makes the game interesting. So I was using Dungeons and Dragons to teach one client, and at one point, like, he changed behavior technicians, and then the behavior technician was playing with him and then rolled dice and rolled a 1, and he turned, and it was for like what turn you would go in combat, and he turned to me and said, "Oh, that's okay. Rolling a 1 in initiative is fine." I was like, yes, oh my gosh. He's really demonstrating a lot of flexibility, not only for himself, but also demonstrating like the sort of, self-talk that you engage in. So really, it's an interesting way to teach a lot of things. Doesn't the dice make it more difficult to reinforce the behaviors you want to see? Not necessarily. So generally speaking, as the clinicians, we would be doing the narrative part of the story. So if I was trying to encourage novel responding, I might not require a dice roll. If you are trying to encourage responding and you start to see that responding, you could say, oh, there's no need to respond. That's fine. You might also give a client an advantage, which would mean you would roll 2 dice and pick the larger number. So there are different ways that you can play around with it, either by not requiring dice rolls or by being a little creative in how they're done. So poll time. Before we get into the specific game systems, I want to know poll number 4. Oh, sorry, no. I'm sorry. I wanted to switch 4 and 5. Can you do the other poll? Too late. Never mind. All right.
The fiction.
So we'll ask that question later. Don't worry about it. We'll ask, do you connect with fictional characters? I'll refer back to this poll question later. My fault. I mixed them up.
Alrighty,
So
everyone.
please connect with fictional characters, and I will refer to this in a few slides.
Awesome. That number's slowing down. Thank you for voting. Okay, let's shut it down. Looks like 54.
So 54% of you, a little more than half is interesting. Only a little bit more than half said, yes, you connect with fictional characters. There are tons of fictional characters just like you. 27% said yes, even though the fictional characters are not like you still connect with them. And 19% of you, a pretty good percentage, said no, fictional characters aren't anything like me, so I don't have any personal connection with them. I want you to remember those answers in a few slides. Okay. So let's talk about programming with RPGs. Now that we have a general sense of what an RPG is like, let's talk about the specific ways that you could, Nathaniel, I'm going to get into the sort of the game mechanic stuff in a little bit. So in the specific ways that we can program. So first, we want to set things up. So the game master reads the narration and makes decisions for what we call the non-player characters. These are the characters with whom the players interact during the story. And the players play cooperatively, so they're working together toward a goal. So this is just a suggestion on how we might set up goals for various aspects of executive functioning. So here are some aspects of working memory. Recalling your character's name. So when we say, Zinnia, it's your turn, then you would then respond to that, remembering that oh, that's my character's name. Also recalling your character's strengths and assets. Well, I've got a crossbow. So that sort of thing is an aspect of working memory. Do you have a visual cue? Is there a verbal cue, or are you independent in that skill? We might also think about using goal selection. Select a goal for your turn. I'm going to try and jump over that wall. Or what I want to do is shoot my crossbow at that goblin. So that would be an example of a goal for your turn. Very short term, but you're still trying to do something. You're still selecting a goal. You might select a goal for the session, the next 2 to 3 turns. We have to get out of this cave, or we have to, find that treasure map. And you might select a goal for the adventure. This might be 2 to 3 different maps or encounters. So we have to find the king's son who's been kidnapped, or we have to rescue the unicorn or something. Oh, Kate, I've got you in a little bit. So these are the types of goals that reflect some aspects of executive functioning. So we've got working memory, and we've got some ideas for practicing goal selection. Planning. If you want to get out of this cave, what are you going to do? Select a strategy based on your goal for that turn, and implement the strategy based on the session goal for the second turn. So if what you want is to take your crossbow and shoot that goblin, you have to position yourself, move on the map in a way that that's going to be possible. And flexibility. This is by far the greatest thing that tabletop role-playing games allows us to practice. Accepting the dice rolls without protest. And I would define protest as, that's not fair. That's cheating. I need to roll again. Not necessarily, oh man. Oh man is participating in the game. Protest is, you're mean. That's not fair. So accepting teammates' decisions without protest. So if somebody else wants to shoot that goblin and you were hoping to shoot that goblin, then that's something you also need to be able to accept. And following the game master's specifications without protest. You missed, or like you didn't quite get rid of the goblin, or the goblin escaped. These are all things that the game master might be specifying as well, and being able to accept that without protest is important as well. Someone said, what about flexibility from the GM? We're going to get into that, Carlos. Someone's a player. Okay, so some amount of protest happens even with players without disabilities. Is there a degree of appropriate level of protest? That is a great question, Jesse. I would say that if the protest still moves the story forward, or if the protest is not arguing with the GM, if the protest moves the story forward, or the protest is in character, that would be one way to do it. I'm going to show you when we get to safety, there's also something that you might want to use if you find that there's a lot of protesting and then there's a lot of, but that's what my character would say. There are ways to navigate that. So there are some social skills here too that are a part of a lot of different games, not just time for an ecological observation and nearby play space. Highly recommend. So there are a lot of opportunities for good sportsmanship skills as well. Taking turns, waiting turns, validating teammates. I love an excited table, but an excited table doesn't mean you're upset when your teammate rolls a 20 on a 20-sided dice. You should be excited about that. So validating and cheering for teammates, that's part of it as well. Again, what's really cool about these games is that they're generally cooperative rather than competitive. Perspective taking. We just had a question about this. So you can describe your character's emotional response. Oh, they just, this goblin came and tried to, this owlbear tried to bite them. They're really mad now. You can also describe your character's thought patterns. So, then my character says, this is too hard. Or sometimes what I've done with clients is, if they are in the middle of combat, I might say, do you want to say something really cool while you do that? And that is really helpful. Self-management. They might want to, if you have, describe how you do it. That's another way to do it. worked with one client who there's a characteristic of barbarians where they go into a rage. And, what we interpret that looks like is, pretty open. So I was working with a client who played a barbarian. I said, what is it? And he played like a kind of a bird person. I said, what does it look like when you go into a rage? What do you think it looks like? And he said, I just spread my wings and I make this really loud noise. So that also in a way is perspective taking. Self-management, recording behavioral data with adult facilitation or without adult facilitation. And I have some strategies for how you could do that in a little bit. So these are the rules that I actually enforce. The role-playing games rules: take turns, accept the dice rolls. What happens in the game is what happened. Once I say that it happened, we're moving the story forward from there. So we're not necessarily teaching kids to accept no so much as we're encouraging them to say yes and cheer for your teammates. We're all working together. These are the hard and fast rules. When I'm doing role-playing games with clients, these are the rules that I expect to enforce. Other things are game mechanics. Those are rules that I can be flexible with. So character selection. Players can select characters with certain abilities like intelligence or knowledge, which might be called arcana or wisdom. They might be able to persuade people. They might be very strong or have certain types of attacks or capabilities. Now, before we get into characters, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about safety in RPGs. And when I say safety, I don't mean strictly physical safety. I need emotional safety. How do we make sure that because the most important rules as a dungeon master, for those of you who've done dungeon mastering, is everyone has fun at the table. Everyone feels safe at the table. You can't have fun if you are uncomfortable. So let's talk a little bit about creating safety. So H.G. Wells famously said, you only have to play at Little Wars 3 or 4 times to realize just what a blundering thing Great War must be. And that's generally my philosophy when it comes to kids and combat. If it's imaginary comic book style combat, I am okay with that. However, we do need to think a lot about consent, and we need to think about cultural responsiveness. Saying that I am okay with that is not saying a client should be okay with that. In terms of cultural responsiveness, it's important to know that enjoyment and levity of fantasy elements is not cross-cultural. So I was asked about like satanic panic. Part of satanic panic is that within some cultures, things like magic are not something fun and light. They are something serious and dark and scary. So it would be the equivalent of playing a tabletop role-playing game that involved a terrorist attack, culturally. I would never be comfortable playing a tabletop role-playing game that involved a terrorist attack. And nor would I expect someone for whom fantasy elements are not like a fun, lighthearted thing to be comfortable playing with those kind of elements like magic. So it's very important to remember that consent is essential. And there are definitely options if there are certain elements of role-playing games that parents don't consent to. Yes, there are RPG checklists for safety, especially knowing player boundaries. We're going to go into a couple other things as well. So this is for younger clients. This is the consent. This is derived from a consent form that I used. So using a program called Hero Kids, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and it describes the fantasy role-playing game. And it does also clarify that given that children collaborate with the development of the story, many story elements may change. So one thing that I say to parents is, if your child is describing combat, I'm not going to stop them. So, and denial of consent for any element does not preclude my child from participation in this activity. So when we're looking at role-playing games, we're mostly looking at systems of rule mechanics. There's nothing about these games that say they have to take place in this fantasy setting. There's nothing about this game that says it has to take place here or there or using this or using that. So, and what I included was combat elements for consent. And I wrote, please note, this game does not include gore, death, or visual depictions of blood or injury. So were they comfortable with their kids talking about swords, knives, fires, axes, ice or water, clubs, bows and arrows, or magic? There might also be monsters. And I again clarified this game does not include gore, death, or visual depictions of blood or injury. And asked for each item, are parents okay with rats, snakes, dragons, bats, ghosts? This is something that culturally might make families really uncomfortable. Pirates, spiders. So let me check the question box for a second. Are these documents and materials provided for us? The consent form is not because it's specific to a particular game, but I've got a lot of other stuff that Marissa's going to share with you. So there's some stuff. Remember that a consent form does not mean permanent and unconditional consent. So there was someone who talked about an RPG checklist for safety. That's helpful in knowing player boundaries. For older clients, you might want to use that. But there are also other ways for players to indicate assent and to withdraw consent. So this is one method, the green, yellow, red cards. We have go, stop, and pause and talk. Let me give you an example of how one might use these. So we had a question about like protesting, especially if it's in character. And that might, if you have somebody go, oh, I'm so frustrated, I really wanted to kill that goblin or whatever. You might say, are you okay to go? And they could show you the go card. Or you, as the DM, could show the pause and talk card and say, like, hang on a second. Let's talk this out. Remember that we need to accept the dice rolls, etc. So what's a different way that you can say that? A player might also, if the game is getting too scary, might show the stop card and say, let's take it back a second. There is a game for younger children. There is a game for younger children called No Thank You Evil. And the instruction in the game is, if this game gets too intense, you say, no thank you evil, game stops. That's it. So, this is one way to assess. You can also just raise the pause and talk and say, I have to go to the bathroom. So this is one way to allow players to give assent, because sometimes specific topics are context dependent. So a lot of the RPG consent forms that you can find online will include like, are you okay with a game that involves racism or sexism? Well, that depends. Am I fighting racism and sexism? Then yeah, bring it on. Is it just kind of an underlying tone of the game? Then no thanks. So this might be a way to set for players to give their assent. Okay, we have a poll question now. Okay, and I'm going to check the question. Are the slides for this presentation going to be available for download? I did not send it in to Marissa, but I will, and she can send them off to you, I think.
Yes, I can. I'll send them on Monday.
Awesome. Okay,
Alrighty.
so awesome. This is great. So I'm sorry, I'm doing your job for you, Marissa. You're the one who says the poll results.
Oh, no problem. You can take it away.
So far, 70% have voted, and it looks like most of you are very comfortable with storytelling, which is great. Some of you are kind of comfortable, and some of you are not comfortable at all. And no matter where you are on your comfort with storytelling, there are some really good resources out there. And when we get into specific game systems, I'm going to talk a little bit about which ones are good, which ones are better for, different reasons. And one of them is like providing more structure so that you don't have to come up with the whole story. All right, so let's talk a little bit about creating safe spaces in terms of representation. So we all have an idea of what fantasy characters are like, right? This is why I asked you, do you connect with fictional characters? So fantasy characters are, have a certain thing. They have able-bodied. They're generally able-bodied, mostly cisgendered, almost always a white dude, and daddy issues. So most characters in fantasy stories are able-bodied, cisgendered white dudes with daddy issues. However, that is because that is most of the people telling the stories. I am always astounded, and this happens every time there's an attempt at more representation. When the new Lord of the Rings series came out, many of the elves were played by people of color. And there were a lot of folks who were very accustomed to seeing able-bodied cisgendered white dudes with daddy issues who said, oh, that's unrealistic about elves. Okay. And there are others who say, oh, you can't have a wheelchair user in Dungeons and Dragons or someone with autism in Dungeons and Dragons. That's unrealistic. Okay, I'm sorry. We can have fire shooting out of my hands. We can have a dragon. We can have spiders the size of the room I'm sitting in, but we can't have an all-terrain wheelchair. Is that the story we're sticking with? So there's no reason not to have more rich representation in our games. So if your client wants to play a different gender or wants to play someone with autism because they have autism, that's great. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with broadening that a little bit. So make sure that you are addressing all kinds of characters. So someone said they like the idea of a bad guy having ramps and braille signs because he might be evil but considerate with his minions. Nice. Okay, so I generally play a character that is me, but like a little more brash and a little braver. On principle, I don't play human characters. I play elves and halflings and, because I'm human all the time and I like to do something different. But there's no reason that a player can't play a character that is either exactly like them or nothing like them. Oh, come on. And now I'm having trouble with the slides. Sorry, I'm gonna just fix this slide. Oh, my slides are stuck. Oh, come on. There we go. All right. Gonna go to where I give my joke about daddy issues. And by the way, for those of you who take issue with the slide, I did have an argument with my son about whether or not Aragorn had daddy issues. According to the movie, he did, but it's all your thing. It depends on your opinion. Okay, so remember, a role-playing game is a game that you make up yourself. You are telling the story. It wasn't because of a particular dislike, Nicholas. I know that my son was like, Aragorn doesn't have daddy issues. Remember, a role-playing game is a story we are making up ourselves. This is a game you make up yourself in collaboration with the players. There's no way to do it wrong. So if you are a little uncomfortable with storytelling and you're like, I'm not sure if I could do this, first and foremost, understand that you can't do it wrong. That's impossible. I played an extended game with my mom during the pandemic, which was really great and really fun. And she said to me afterwards, she was like, I don't feel like I was good at it. And I said, how can you not be good at it? You're making it up. So there's no way to do it wrong. All right, now it's playtime. All right, so I'm going to go through a couple of game systems. Kate, thank you. And please watch the rest of the webinar because I'm going to go through a couple of game systems. I'm going to go through a couple of game systems and we'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each one and demonstrate some play. All right, we're going to skip this poll and we'll do that poll a little bit later. Okay, so the games we're going to talk about are Hero Kids and Amazing Tales. These are the two games we're going to talk about first. So Hero Kids has the advantage of pre-made character sheets. So there was someone who asked about character creation and character selection. This makes it really easy. They also use six-sided dice. They only use six-sided dice, which can be an advantage or a disadvantage. It's much more scripted. So if you're not 100% comfortable with storytelling, this allows you to use something to fall back on. Most play decisions involve combat. So if there are parents who are a little bit uncomfortable with that type of gameplay or that type of storytelling, Hero Kids might not be the best choice. Another type of game is Amazing Tales. In this game, players can design their own characters. There are pre-made characters, but not as many, and they're not as rich. It uses multiple dice. So I'm going to show you a few dice that I have here. So here, can you guys see my dice? Okay, so there are several different types of dice. There is the 20-sided dice. There is the 8-sided dice. This is a 10-sided dice and a 4-sided dice. So Amazing Tales allows users to use multiple dice, which if you have kids who are fascinated by math, that I have found that to be a real in for playing these games, is that they're like, there are dice with 20 sides. Standard polyhedral sets work great. Okay, so the idea that dice can have so many sides is fascinating to a lot of kids, especially ones who are really excited about math and numbers generally. So let's begin with Hero Kids. Do I have a volunteer? I'm going to lower all the hands so that someone can volunteer. Do I have a volunteer to play the game? Okay, Jody Lennon all right, I'm going to pick Jody first. Marissa, could you unmute Jody for a moment?
Sure, bear with me 1 second. Finding Jody in the list. Jody
Lennon.
All right, let's see. And ask to unmute. Here we go. Hopefully that works.
Okay.
Jody?
All right, Jody. Let's start with character selection. Which character do you like the best? Do we have Jody unmuted? or do we need another volunteer?
Hey, Jody, are you there?
I am. Okay, let's unmute you. Can you unmute yourself?
I sent you
You can do it for the question.
Yes.
Which character do you like the best? There's the little rogue with the, brown suit. There's the knight with the armor. There's the hunter who uses magic. Rogue. Okay, so this is the rogue. So for this game, we would use 1 dice unless you have a special skill. Okay, that's okay. Don't worry about it, Jody. Unless you have a special skill. So it's 1 dice plus whatever extra dice you have, right? So you have a ranged attack. You can throw daggers, and you can also be sneaky. You are very nimble. And you have with you a rope. You're able to hide, and you have 2 healing potions. So for preparations, we would review the rules and expectations. So Jody, we are going to take turns. Make sure that you accept the dice rolls. And remember that what we say happens in the story is what happens in the story. And cheer for your team. We would then make sure that they have their character card. In some cases, we would roll for initiative order. This is a particular strategy that I use. In the event of a tie, advantage or the first turn goes to the player or the client. In the event of tie among players or clients within a group session, we would give the first turn to the youngest. And make sure that you're providing praise for waiting turns and cheering for your team and following the other rules as well. So what I would do as the GM is I would read the scripted portion from the manual, and then I would call on the client for their turn. Within this game, they can move 4 spaces. And then as they move into the sight line of particular monsters, I would bring those into the map. Okay? So, Joe, here I go. I'm going to read. You all live in the same village, Rivenshore, which is nestled in a tight valley beneath a towering mountain. A river runs past the village and flows into a small bay. Rivenshore would be a beautiful place to live if it weren't beset by an endless series of calamities. You're enjoying your weekly family feast at the Block and Tackle Tavern after a hard day of training. Help! Help! Everyone in the tavern stops eating and drinking as Maeve, the innkeeper's wife, bursts into the dining room from the basement. Rats! Rats! Enormous rats! And they've taken Roger. You know Roger. He's Maeve's son, and he helps out in the tavern. They've taken him down their hidey hole. Please get down there and get him back for me. There's a moment of silence as everyone looks to you. Your parents encourage you. I hope you're ready for your first adventure. So now you see this gives you all the narration you need. So if you are worried about getting stuck in the story, but not knowing what to do next, Hero Kids is a great option. And there's tons of different adventures. So when it's time for the client to take action, you can say, okay, what do you want to do? So Jody, what do you want to do? I will show you the map. Here we go. So here's you, Jody. Let's see. So you start off here, and you could go 4 spaces. So what do you want to do? You can go straight ahead. You can go 3 and then turn. What would you like to do, Jody? Finish my meal. What kind of a hero are you? A hungry one. Okay, so you finish your meal, and so you're eating your meal, and and now you're nice and full. And Maeve comes and sits down next to the table and says, "Your parents told me that they thought you could help. Do you think you can?" Yes, I can. Okay, great. So Maeve says, thank you. And then she says, listen, I'm in the middle of making a huge cake. And if you bring Roger back here safely, you can have an enormous slice. Okay, so, and she brings you to the hidey hole. Yay, says Jody. Okay, great. So sometimes your clients might kind of surprise you with like, oops, sorry. Okay. Sometimes your clients might surprise you. Sometimes they won't be ready to do the game. So you role play along with that. We have to yes and also, right? So now Jody's got a little more incentive. So maybe this is something that I need to consider as the DM. Maybe Jody's character needs a little bit more motivation. So maybe they need to be offered a reward or something. That's something I need to keep in mind. So Jody, do you want to go straight forward 4 or do you want to go 3 and then turn? All right, here we go. 3 and turn. Okay, so you end up here. Ah! And as you're coming down the stairs, you see a rat. What do you do next? And remember that you have your daggers and you have a rope. So if you want to use either one of those 2 things, you can, or you can try and make a break for it. Use my daggers. Okay, so you're using your daggers. That is a ranged attack. So I will roll. Oh, you know what? I'm going to do it with my actual dice. I will do it with online dice. Okay, I will do it with online dice. All right, so I'm going to use my online dice. Looking back at your character sheet, if you use your daggers, you get 1 dice. So you get 1 dice. So roll those a 2. Now so you got a 2, which if the rat rolls a 1, then you successfully hit the rat. Okay, so now it's my roll. 5. So the rat dodges away from your dagger. So that's just one little, Darren, I'll answer you in just a second. So that's just one example of how you might play this game. It is an interesting system. It's it also, because it's more kid focused, there are fewer decisions to make, and the character sheets are very, very, very simple. So those are some of the advantages of the system. It's also very focused on like the kids are playing kids. So that's kind of a fun thing about it. Let's see, where were we? Okay, so again, just as I did here, I asked Jody what she wanted to do. And then because, she was typing, I gave a verbal prompt. I might suggest 2 options for the goal. Like, do you want to try and make a break for it, or do you want to fight the rat? And when the client selected a goal, I want to fight the rat. How do you want to do that? I want to use my dagger. So you can also provide verbal prompts with, like, for example, 2 options for remember that you have your daggers, remember that you have your rope. And you can check the manual for difficulty or just determine difficulty yourself. So something that's easy might be, you might have to roll a 4. Something that's more difficult, you might have to roll a 6. I was asked if what age range is specified for this game. Ages 4 to 10, I believe. I was asked if I ever play with miniatures. Another really cool thing about Hero Kids is that in each of the adventures, they have these maps that you can print out, and they also have little miniatures, paper miniatures that you can print out. Tabletop role-playing games are great because all you need to play is your imagination. What you might want is a totally different story. So Hero Kids does provide some visuals that you can use in terms of like moving little paper figures around a map. And that, having that visual can be a great support for some of our kids who might have more difficulty attending. To tell the story without those visuals is referred to as theater of the mind, which can be a lot more challenging. That said, it should not be an obstacle. So I have these little miniatures. I made sure I had all my Dungeons & Dragons stuff out in case anybody asked questions then. I have these little miniatures, which you can buy in bulk on Amazon. I also, where's my pretty one that I painted? And I also have, here it is. I also have fancier ones that I painted myself, which is kind of fun. They're not necessary. You can print out a small picture of something and use that. Reaper bones are very cheap and very high quality if you want to include those. I'm not familiar with Reaper bones. In the case of Hero Kids, we would also include a description of how many dice could roll. Oh, the company is called Reaper and Bones is their plastic line. Thank you. In the case of Hero Kids, Nicholas, I'll get to your question in a second. In the case of Hero Kids, we would allow the client to roll dice, then tell them if they succeed. Describe what that success or failure looks like. Make sure that you provide praise for flexibility, which especially accepting the dice rolls. And then roll dice for non-player characters, if applicable. Describe the success or failure of the non-player character. So as I did, like they dodge out of the way. And provide praise for flexibility. Make sure you're also providing praise for waiting turns and cheering for your team. And continue the turns until you reach the next portion of the narration in the book. And again, in Hero Kids, this is all pretty much spelled out for you. So if you're new to tabletop role-playing games, it's a great starting point. It's a great entry point. Okay, and then we already did this map. All right, another really great role-playing game for younger children is called Amazing Tales. If you have clients or parents who are uncomfortable with all those combat elements, Amazing Tales is a great way to introduce the same concepts of flexibility, but leave aside those elements of combat. Amazing Tales can be a little tricky if you're not as comfortable with storytelling. So that can be a little problematic. But it is a wonderful option, and it focuses more on adventure and problem solving than on combat. So there are some pre-made characters in Amazing Tales, but depending on the client, there aren't a lot, and there's not like a wide range of how to use them. So character creation is kind of part of the process. That would be great. So because this is for younger children, they're encouraged to draw their character. It's a 1-page character sheet. They would decide their best skill, what they are the best at, what they are very good at, what they are kind of good at, and what they are, or what they're good at and what they are kind of good at. And so the thing that they're the best at, they would roll a D12, which is a 12-sided die, like this little guy right here. The thing that they are second at. So one of the things that's cool about this game is it uses polyhedral dice. It uses a variety of dice. So if you have kids who are interested in math, this, introducing those different types of dice is really fun. So we're going to use a pre-made character for this next adventure. And the pre-made character is going to be Bridget the Badger. Bridget is really good at making friends. It's her biggest strength. She's also really strong. She's brave, and she's good at smelling things. Now, anything else, anything that's not among her strengths, you would have to roll a D4, which is a 4-sided die. So if it's something that's really hard, you probably want to use those strengths. Do we have a volunteer for playing Bridget the Badger? Please raise your hand if you're ready to volunteer to play Bridget the Badger. Okay, Colleen. Colleen, you may use the question box in the interest of time. So, a gentle patter of rain falls up and down the riverbank. Bridget the Badger is walking along the forest. She starts to notice this rain. And up to her comes Mrs. Prickle, who's a very tired hedgehog. Her nest is getting wet, and she needs help patching it up. So Bridget's walking. This is, again, like this, the storytelling is not as well defined as it is in here where you get like a bunch of narration. So you would have to read this and then say, Bridget's walking along and starts to feel the rain just gently coming down. As she's walking, she hears a little voice saying, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. And we start to get a little curious. So do you think that, Colleen, how does Bridget respond when she sees Mrs. Prickle come up to her and say, when she's hearing Mrs. Prickle say, oh my goodness, I will never be able to patch all this up. I'm using my little tired hedgehog voice. So how do you think Bridget the Badger is going to respond? Ask how you can help. Oh, so Bridget's very good at making friends. So she walks up to Miss Prickle, and Miss Prickle is very tired and exhausted. So I'm not going to make you roll dice for that because Miss Prickle is looking for a friend right now. So Miss Prickle says, oh, my nest is all wet. These 4 babies are getting cold. I don't know what to do. So Colleen, you have any ideas? What do you think you should do? So remembering that you are good at making friends, you're strong, you're brave, and you're good at smelling things. So what do you think you should do? Offer to get dry thatch to patch. Fantastic. So how are you going to do that? So that's your goal. How are you going to do that? How are you going to find the dry thatch? Smell it out. Okay, so I think this is going to be a difficulty of, let's see, get some friends to help. You know what? Those are 2 really great. So which do you want to try first? Get friends to help or smell it out? Smell. Okay, so I'm going to say I'm going to use my actual manual dice, which I kind of like better anyway. I like the little satisfying clickety-clack. So I'm going to say this is going to be a difficulty of 3. If you get 3 or higher, you successfully smell out some dry thatch. 1. So you're running around, you're trying to smell the dry thatch, but it's rainy, and so that that rain smell, when rain mixes with bark, it's very distracting for you. So what's next? Now you're going to get some friends. Okay, so since you're so good at getting friends, I'm going to say this is going to be a difficulty of 4. So the odds are in your favor. If you get a 4 or above, you successfully find some friends around in the rain to help you to patch up. Whoops. Uh-oh. I have to roll that again. 6. So you start looking around for your friends and you say like, hey, it's me, Bridget. Can anyone help me? And that's the dangerous material of life. It's true. And out of the forest, you see a deer comes out and helps you. And also, because you got a 6, a beaver comes out as well. So these are two animals that you got, a big animal and an animal that's great with wood. So I'm optimistic about how well you will do. Another thing that's particular to Amazing Tales is a tabletop might not be necessary. So for younger children, you can also include movement. Instead of talking about patching up the home for Mrs. Prickle, you could actually act it out. You could use large blocks if you're in a classroom. You can incorporate those kinds of movement. So that might be really helpful for kids who need a little bit more freedom of movement. Could you play these online? Yes, you can. Again, Amazing Tales relies a bit more on theater of mind. I like to use PowerPoints and then use the pens and use animation, as I did earlier with the slide for Hero Kids. So you can absolutely play these online. I like to do it over Zoom. I did have a question about a platform called Roll20. Roll20's got a lot of mechanics to it. It's a little bit difficult to learn. So I've had success doing this online. I think that my clients certainly could use Roll20, but it's learning where everything is and how everything goes can be a little bit of an obstacle. And there's also technology that we're already a lot more familiar with PowerPoint, so you can do that as well. Also using the whiteboard on Zoom is very helpful. Sometimes I'll use the virtual backgrounds to be like, okay, go here, and then go here, and then go here, and then go. So that might be helpful as well. One game to rule them all. Dungeons and Dragons. This is by far the most popular and well-known tabletop role-playing game. So yeah, I am in Hobbiton. So but it also has the most complex rule structure. So this rule system can apply to any setting. You want to do Dungeons and Dragons in like a film noir kind of 1940s metropolitan area, go to it. You want to do Dungeons and Dragons in space, great. So the rule system can apply to any setting. It is most appropriate for older children, but I want to be really cautious about that word most, because even though middle school and older are the ages where it's recommended, younger children can learn these systems. That can be, and it can be really fun and it can be simplified enough so that they can follow it and it can be really fun. So here are the considerations, especially with Dungeons and Dragons, where there's so many rules, is that we can be flexible I'm mixing up two and cool. So I like to follow the rule of cool. And, Darren started playing when he was 6. Yeah, my youngest kid is 9 and plays Dungeons and Dragons and loves it. So I like to follow what I call the rule of cool. The rules should serve to structure the game, not restrict the fun. So if it's funny or, cool in some way, then that's how we should be playing. Not, it says on this page. Rule of cool. This is an example of a blank character sheet for Dungeons and Dragons. As you can see, there's a lot of information that goes on there. It's a lot to follow. So if you have someone who's new to tabletop role-playing games, it might be a little bit intimidating. The process of character creation, if you want to create a character from scratch, can take a really long time, so it can take a while to get to the game. So you want to make sure that you're making this accessible and fun from the very beginning. That's only the first page, by the way. So when it comes to understanding the statistics, this is a very common way to describe statistics in Dungeons and Dragons. These are the common statistics. Strength, which is like being able to crush a tomato. Dexterity is being able to dodge a tomato when it's thrown at you. Constitution is being able to eat a bad tomato. Intelligence is knowing a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put a tomato in a fruit salad. Charisma is being able to sell a tomato-based fruit salad, although we all know that's salsa. So there are also like pages and pages of information that can be filled. But character creation can be simple. I like to start off with a new player. I like to start off with pre-made characters, just make it really, really easy. I also want to share with you that Dungeons and Dragons has a starter kit, which includes a set of dice, an adventure, 5 pre-generated characters, each with a character sheet, and a shortened rule book. You can also create pre-made characters on dndbeyond.com. So starting off with a pre-made character, and then after your first adventure, when you might want to change levels from level 1 to level 2, you can ask your client, do you want a new character or do you want to stick with the character that you have? And give them that opportunity to change things up. But I would not start with intense character creation before they get a chance to experience the game. There are also some simplified character sheets. So this has all the same information that long 4-page thing had. It has everything that you need to know. And it's much more simplified. I also like to color code for younger children. I like to color code the different characteristics so that instead of saying roll for dexterity, I say roll your dice and add the orange number. Okay, so I'm going to ask for another volunteer, last volunteer. Last volunteer, Dana Fry. Dana, okay. Dana, I'd like you to pick which one of these you like the best. There's no wrong answer. Just which one do you like the best? You can pick a male character or a female character. You can pick one. You can have them have different pronouns. It's entirely up to you. Dwarf cleric, male or female dwarf cleric, it doesn't make a difference. Just you should have some attachment to it. And also the dwarf cleric can use they, them pronouns if that's male, please. Sounds good? All right. So here we are. We have our dwarf cleric. So this is you're at a tavern and you're sitting at a tavern. So you walk in, the bar is over here. There's some halflings, which are like hobbits. They're like kind of shorter oh, I have a picture of a halfling. Yeah, this is what a halfling looks like. So they're kind of shorter. They're friendly halfling bartenders. You got 3 bartenders behind the bar. You have 3 humans sitting at this table. You have 2 other humans at this table. You have a half orc sitting over here, half elf sitting over there. And you're sitting at this table right here, just kind of enjoying some ale. And the bard is playing. It is not generally considered good form for the DM to do the first dice roll, but you might want to consider modeling a dice roll for your clients. So the bard is performing on the stage and he's going to do just a straight luck performance check, which means 11 or higher and it's a good performance, and 10 or lower and it's not great. 6. So the bard is playing his lute and he's like, green sleeves is my delight. It's not good. So this is why we might want to model a bad type. I'm already sympathetically clapping. So the bard kind of smiles and like kind of nods and appreciates your thought. So in walks this guy and he says, "Give me all your gold, everyone. Gold up here." And you look and you notice he's followed by this guy and this guy. All right, Dana, this is another thing that I do with clients specifically. In Dungeons and Dragons, it's very common for let's go around the table and introduce your characters. That works really well sometimes, but if we're working with kids who have social deficits, that is really intimidating. I like to call it LinkedIn for elves. It's don't do it. Don't make someone introduce a pre-made character to start off the game. You're starting off with the aspects of the game that are going to be most intimidating. Drop them into combat right away. Let them roll dice. Let them talk about like an ongoing situation. And then after the combat is over, they can have the chance to role play introducing their characters. So Dana, what do you want to do? Oh, I have a question. Dana, what do you want to do? I want to shout for the people closest to move away. Oh, fantastic. So that is a free action. So talking is a free action. You shout to the two humans that to get out of the way. Let's, I'm not going to say it's a persuasion check. I think they're going to listen to you right away. So you shout to them to get out of the way. And then what do you do? Any thoughts? Okay. All right. I'm going to get my Warhammer out first. Okay, so get your Warhammer out. Now you are at this table, so you have enough movement to go to approach one of the goblins, to approach any of them that you want to. So which of them would you want to approach? Oh, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to have you roll for initiative. Approach the head goblin. All right, so this is starting the fight. You are starting the fight. I'm going to say that the head goblin did not know that you were going to approach him. How do you approach him and do what? This head goblin is totally expecting like an easy robbery out of this place. So I'm going to give you the advantage of starting before we roll initiative. And I want to tell him, okay, I want to tell him to leave and that no one is going to give him coin. Intimidation check. So she's going to try and intimidate the goblin. Now, Dana has obviously played before. So there is a list of different things that you could try. So we're going to do an intimidation check, which I believe is under charisma intimidation. So there are modifiers. There's going to be a plus or a minus with a smaller number. So the modifier for intimidation is +3. So I'm going to say this is going to be a difficulty class of 15. So if you get a 12 or more, you successfully intimidate this goblin. 10. The goblin just snorts at you and says, and looks at this most scared looking human over at this back table and says, I'm pretty sure I could get their gold. And now we would roll for initiative. So I'm going to roll for goblin number 1, 16, goblin number 2, 18, goblin number 3, 20. So this goblin, and I will roll for you, Dana. 17. So this goblin over here goes first. This goblin over here goes first. This goblin is going to approach you and hit you with his club. Your armor class is an 18. So I would have to get 18 or higher on my roll I got a 6, which means that my goblin approaches you, tries to hit you with his club, and you duck out of the way. I don't know if I went off camera there. So in the interest of time, oh my gosh, we're running late. So in the interest of time, we're gonna move on. But that is like how I would play with a client. Have I ever left on a cliffhanger? Yes, with a promise to play the next time. So, and I had a client who was discharging, and I made sure that we finished up the adventure before he discharged. Poll time, real quick. Have you used behavioral traps?
Amazing. Thank you all for voting so quickly.
All right. That was very quick. Okay, I'm going to try and get through the rest of the material real quick. It's much less involved, so I'm confident. All right, we've got a yes, a no, and a what? It's not a very nice way to describe this concept. So behavioral traps are integrated contingencies that motivate a client to acquire new skills. And one of the cool things about them is they're not satiation effects. So you can use behavioral traps within and around tabletop role-playing games. So for example, if you have a client interested in firefighters and the goal was following gaze, you could bait the trap by saying, let's play firefighters. And then have them engage in an easy to perform behavior by pretending to put out the fire. And the related contingency, you could say, the fire's over there, and have them follow your gaze to find the fire. They're working on a goal, but in a context of something that is really preferred. So RPGs can be behavioral traps and can involve teaching a more complex skill. Math, reading, these are things that are really embedded in RPGs, but also conversation and social inference. Dimension 20 is the best. So this is, I want to be clear before I play this video, it's going to be very short. This is a bit. Not only is the GM not Scottish, but the Ali Beardsley, the player, is playing a character who struggles in social situations. And this was fascinating because this was actually, when I heard this, I was like, oh my God, that's the best behavioral goal imaginable. So let's play it. Let's see. Turn off. Okay.
Claves, rebel lords, places that haven't paid their taxes to the Concord. You know, the Concord's only existed for 20 years. There's not unanimous. It's, you know, something like 80 or 90% of Calorum has given over fealty. But just because you live outside of the borders of what we consider the civilized world, just, I don't know, there's just common courtesy.
What do? You read a book? You listen to someone speak about how to be good with people? What do you... I'm looking for some practical pointers here, okay?
How about this? Right. In the future, start with when you're meeting a person, pick one detail of something not on their body or how they look on their face, but of something, maybe either a piece of clothing or something they're holding, or maybe something they've worked on, and just look to give them one sincere compliment about something that, again, is not their physical characteristics.
Okay, I'll try.
So you see someone, either something they've done or something they have, and that's all fair game. All right?
Okay.
And just give one sincere compliment. And then, if that worked, you just cut it off there and bail. You see, sort of...
That is some of the best advice about initiating social interaction that I have ever heard. So I remember watching that and saying, and this is, the context of this is, it's a Dungeons & Dragons game that takes place in a world where everyone is food. Like, it's not intended to be a behavioral program, but that, you know, RPG could have provided that sort of behavioral trap for teaching those things. From that moment on, anytime that character attempted to give a compliment based on something someone did or something someone had, they rolled with advantage. So they got to roll 2 dice and picked the higher number. So if you had a client who was legitimately struggling with social interaction, use this. That would work great. So let's talk a little bit more about like different things we could use within behavioral traps. You can also add additional reinforcers to your RPG games. There are, because RPGs involve a long-term commitment to your character, you can expand on their abilities and equipment. So Hero Kids allows you to do this with special equipment that you might have. They allow you to get pets. Young kids love to have pets in their games. So you can have a pet that can do combat with you. There's also a concept, this is a legitimate concept in Dungeons & Dragons called inspiration. This is an opportunity to re-roll the dice. So if you roll badly, you can choose to spend your inspiration and then re-roll the dice. When I worked with a client who was working on a lot of self-management programs for things that were not as much fun as Dungeons & Dragons, if he completed his checklist, when I arrived for the session, he got inspiration for every day that he completed the checklist. There might also be additional behavioral support. This is a bingo card that I made actually for my own children that include the rules for Dungeons and Dragons, the actual rules that I really enforce. Waiting, cheering for your team, accepting the dice rolls, taking your turn. So other target behaviors might include staying on topic, recalling events of the game, or describing the activity. But you could provide this additional behavioral support during the game. There can also be behavioral cusps. RPGs can access a new community of potential reinforcers, which includes self-management tools, that includes apps incorporating similar principles. If you Google, this is from Modern Sam, which is an app that I use for my to-do list. So, but there are lots of them. So if you Google gamify productivity, you'll find dozens of apps that incorporate storytelling and fantasy elements into task completion. It also provides access to new social communities. So it provides a context for socialization. If you show up to play Dungeons & Dragons at your local game store, you're already socializing. You don't have to think about who you're going to be a friend with. It's provided for you. You have that social context. Okay. So finding materials. If I'm working online, I like to use Roll Dice Online. There are other, programs that I find Roll20 a little bit. There's a bit of a learning curve there. For some games, you would use polyhedral dice. Again, those are really fun for kids who love math. Other games use 6-sided dice. These are really easy to get. And if you can't get them, just Google Roll Dice Online and Google will show you dice. As far as stories and ideas for storytelling, I love the website Drive-Thru RPG. Hero Kids is available there, Amazing Tales is available there, and tons of resources for both of those games are available. Plus, I think I mentioned the game No Thank You Evil, which is a preschool level tabletop RPG. That's available there as well. And Dungeons & Dragons, if you look on D&D Beyond, this is part of a free educator kit. So you sign up for the free educator kit and they will mail you a poster, the starter set, a bunch of character cards, and all sorts of fun stuff to start a Dungeons & Dragons game. Okay, and here are our references. We are a little bit over time, so we're 10 minutes over time. Oh my gosh, such a long webinar. I hope that you all enjoyed it. I don't want to keep you. Kids on Bikes. Yes, Kids on Bikes is another great system, and that can be adapted to eliminate some of the mystery, some of the fantasy elements as well. It can be more about following a mystery. So what I would recommend is, if you have not already, start watching actual play of tabletop role-playing games. My favorite is a show called Dimension 20, which is available on Dropout TV. That's the Dungeon Master that you just saw. And there are a number there. That is a fantastic show, very entertaining, especially because all of the players are comedy improv actors. So they're really fun to watch. It's not watching people throw dice. it's really watching the storytelling. So it's an incredible amount of fun. And it's really inspiring. And it's a great way to get started is watching people play. There is also one of the seasons of Dimension 20 was a season called Mentopolis, which used the game system of Kids on Bikes, which is another game system that we didn't have time to get into today, but a great game system nonetheless. So I hope that this, sorry, that's not what I meant to do. Right. I hope that this inspired you and got you to think a little bit differently about how to incorporate games and gamifying elements into your sessions. And I hope that you all had a great time. And if you have never played tabletop role-playing games before,